The rain fell in relentless sheets across the glass towers of downtown Seattle, each droplet catching the amber glow of streetlights like tears against the darkening sky. In the penthouse office of Meridian Technologies, Marcus Chen stood silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like in the storm-washed glass. At 34, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, yet tonight the weight of isolation pressed against his chest like a physical thing. "You're too serious, Marcus." The voice belonged to Derek Walsh, his oldest friend and biggest rival, who lounged in the Italian leather chair across from Marcus's desk. Derek's laugh carried the sharp edge of expensive whiskey and bitter ambition. "When's the last time you did something spontaneous? Something that wasn't calculated down to the decimal point?" Marcus turned from the window, his dark eyes reflecting years of careful strategy and guarded emotions. "Spontaneity is expensive, Derek. It's how fortunes are lost. Or won." Derek's smile turned predatory as he leaned forward, his phone buzzing with notifications from his own tech company's stock ticker. The rivalry between them had started in their Harvard dorm room and had only intensified as their companies competed for market dominance. "I bet you couldn't last a week living outside your comfort zone. Really outside it." The challenge hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus had built his empire on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. But Derek's words touched something deeper, a recognition of the golden cage he'd constructed around himself. "What did you have in mind?" Derek's eyes gleamed with the thrill of a man about to deliver a devastating blow. "That homeless woman I saw you walking past every morning this week. The one by the Pioneer Square station. Marry her." The words hit Marcus like a physical shock. Through the window, lightning illuminated the city below, revealing the stark contrast between the glittering towers and the shadowed alleys where Seattle's forgotten population sought shelter. "You're insane." "Am I? You've got everything money can buy, but you're the loneliest man I know. 7 days married to someone who has nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you can make it work, really work, I'll withdraw my bid for the Patterson contract. That's $50 million in revenue you're looking at." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Patterson contract would secure Meridian's existence as the dominant player in cloud infrastructure for the next decade. But more than that, Derek's challenge awakened something he'd buried beneath years of corporate armor, a curiosity about life beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. "And if I fail, you sign over your stake in the Aurora Project." The Aurora Project, Marcus's vision for revolutionizing sustainable energy through advanced AI, represented 3 years of development and $200 million in investment. It was his legacy, his chance to leave a mark beyond quarterly earnings. Derek knew exactly what he was asking for. 24 hours, Marcus heard himself saying. "Give me 24 hours to think about it." But even as the words left his mouth, he was already thinking about the woman Derek had mentioned. He'd noticed her too, huddled against the brick wall of the old train station, her dark hair falling like a curtain across her face. There was something about her stillness, her dignity even in desperate circumstances, that had caught his attention each morning as his driver navigated through the downtown traffic. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of Seattle drizzle that seemed to seep into everything. Marcus found himself walking instead of riding, his usual designer suit replaced with jeans and a simple jacket. The weight of Derek's challenge pressed against his thoughts as he made his way toward Pioneer Square, each step carrying him further from his familiar world. She was there, just as she had been every morning for the past week. But up close, Marcus could see details that his tinted windows had hidden. Her clothes were worn but clean, carefully maintained despite her circumstances. Her hands, wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee from a nearby food truck, were delicate but showed the signs of someone who'd worked hard for everything she'd ever had. When she looked up at his approach, her eyes held a wariness that spoke of too many disappointments, too many promises broken by people who claimed to want to help. "Excuse me," Marcus began, his usual confidence desert him in the face of her direct gaze. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a proposition that might sound completely insane." She studied him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything about him, from his expensive shoes to the nervous energy in his movements. "Mister, if you're looking for something I can't give you, you might want to keep walking." Her voice carried traces of education beneath the guardedness, a hint of the person she'd been before whatever circumstances had brought her to this sidewalk. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "No, nothing like that. I'm Marcus Chen. I run a tech company here in the city, and I have a proposal that could help both of us." "Tech company." She said the words like they tasted bitter. "Let me guess. You need someone to test your new app for helping the homeless? Or maybe you want to put me in one of your promotional videos to show how much your company cares about the community." The cynicism in her voice told a story of exploitation, of people who'd seen her situation as an opportunity for their own advancement. Marcus felt a stab of shame at how his own proposal might sound. "My name is Elena," she continued, "and I've heard every pitch in the book from people who think they can solve homelessness with technology." "Elena." He repeated her name softly, and something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "This isn't about technology. It's about marriage." If he'd hoped to surprise her, he succeeded. Elena's eyebrows rose, and for the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Well, that's a new one. What exactly are you proposing, Marcus Chen of the tech company?" The rain began to fall harder, and Marcus gestured toward the covered area near the train station. As they moved out of the weather, he found himself studying Elena's face, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. This wasn't going to be the simple transaction Derek had envisioned. "I need a wife for 7 days, Marcus said, the words sounding absurd even to him. "It's complicated, involving a business deal and a bet with someone who thinks he knows everything about my life. In return, I can offer you security, a place to stay, and enough money to get back on your feet permanently." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. When she spoke, her voice held a mixture of curiosity and caution. "What kind of marriage are we talking about? Because if you think desperate circumstances make me willing to compromise my dignity, you're mistaken. A real marriage, legally binding, but on your terms. Separate bedrooms, no expectations beyond what you're comfortable with. All I ask is that we give it an honest try. 7 days to see if two people from completely different worlds can find common ground. And after 7 days, you'll have enough money to start over anywhere you want. A clean slate, no strings attached." Elena studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. The rain drummed against the metal roof above them, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to separate them from the rest of the world. "Why me? You could hire an actress, someone who'd play the part without complications." Marcus considered the question, surprised by his own answer. "Because you're real. Because when I look at you, I see someone who's survived things that would break most people, and you're still here. There's strength in that, dignity in that can't be faked." Something shifted in Elena's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "What's the real reason you're doing this, Marcus? And don't give me some line about business deals, there's something else." The perceptiveness of her question caught him off guard. In boardrooms, Marcus was known for his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves and motivations. But Elena's directness stripped away his usual defenses. "Maybe I'm tired of living in a world where everything has a price and nothing has real value. Maybe I want to remember what it feels like to connect with someone without contracts and negotiations getting in the way." Elena was silent for a long time, her gaze moving from his face to the busy street beyond their shelter. People hurried past with umbrellas and purpose, each absorbed in their own lives and concerns. None of them looked toward the covered area where a tech mogul and a homeless woman negotiated a marriage that could change both their lives. "If I say yes," Elena said finally, "there are conditions. I won't be your charity case or your social experiment. I won't pretend to be grateful for scraps from your table. And if at any point you treat me like anything less than an equal partner in this arrangement, the deal is off." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Agreed. Anything else?" "I want to know your story, too. Not the public version, not the corporate biography. The real reasons you're standing here in the rain proposing to a stranger." The vulnerability in her request surprised him. In his world, personal history was carefully curated, shared only strategically, and always with an eye toward advantage. But Elena's honesty demanded the same in return. Fair enough. But that's a conversation that might take more than 7 days. Elena's smile this time was genuine, transforming her face and revealing the woman she'd been before circumstances had forced her to build walls. Then we'd better get started. The marriage ceremony took place that afternoon in the courthouse, a simple civil procedure that felt surreal to both of them. Marcus had arranged for legal documents that protected Elena's interests while satisfying the technical requirements of Derek's challenge. As they stood before the judge, exchanging vows that felt both meaningless and profound, Marcus caught sight of Elena's hands trembling slightly as she held the simple ring he'd purchased from a jewelry store near the courthouse. "You okay?" he whispered during a pause in the proceedings. Elena nodded, but her voice was soft when she replied, "It's been a long time since anyone made promises to me, even temporary ones." The words hit Marcus with unexpected force. In his world, promises were contracts, enforceable and binding, but ultimately transactional. But standing there, watching Elena struggle with the simple act of accepting someone's word, he began to understand the weight of trust in a way he'd never considered before. That evening, Marcus brought Elena to his penthouse apartment, watching her take in the space with careful, non-judgmental eyes. The apartment was a showcase of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries. But through Elena's eyes, Marcus began to see it differently. The space was beautiful, but cold, impressive, but uninviting. "This is where you live?" Elena asked, setting down the small bag that contained all her possessions. "This is where I sleep and store my things," Marcus corrected. "I'm not sure I'd call it living." Elena moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights below. Her reflection in the glass was ghost-like, fragile against the backdrop of urban power and wealth. It must get lonely up here, so far above everything. The observation was quietly devastating in its accuracy. Marcus had designed his life to insulate himself from the messiness of human connection, to maintain control through distance and detachment. But Elena's presence in his space highlighted the emptiness he'd been carrying for years. "The guest room is down the hall," Marcus said, suddenly awkward in his own home. "It has its own bathroom and a view of the Sound. I've had some clothes delivered that should fit you, and there's food in the kitchen whenever you're hungry." Elena turned from the window, studying his face with those perceptive eyes. "What happens now? Do we just pretend to be married for a week and then go back to our separate lives?" The question forced Marcus to confront the reality of what they'd undertaken. Derek's challenge had seemed like a simple business proposition, but standing here with Elena in his apartment, he realized how naive that assumption had been. You couldn't fake the kind of intimacy that marriage implied, not with someone as perceptive as Elena. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I've never been married before, temporary or otherwise. I suppose we figure it out as we go." Elena nodded slowly as if his uncertainty was somehow reassuring. "In that case, I think we should start with dinner. Real dinner, not room service or takeout. Something we cook together." The suggestion was so normal, so domestic, that it caught Marcus completely off guard. When was the last time he'd cooked anything more complicated than coffee? When had he last shared a meal with someone that wasn't a business dinner or corporate function? "I should warn you," Marcus said, following Elena toward the kitchen, "my culinary skills are limited to what can be microwaved or delivered." Elena's laugh was warm and genuine, the first truly unguarded sound he'd heard from her. "Good thing one of us knows their way around a kitchen then. My grandmother made sure I could cook before she'd let me leave home." As they moved around the kitchen together, Elena taking inventory of ingredients while Marcus proved to be a surprisingly willing sous chef, their conversation began to flow more naturally. Elena talked about her grandmother, a formidable woman who'd raised her after her parents' death in a car accident when Elena was 12. Marcus found himself sharing stories from his own childhood, memories of his immigrant parents who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they'd never had. They wanted me to be a doctor, Marcus said, chopping vegetables under Elena's careful instruction. My father used to say that technology changes, but people always need healing. What changed your mind? Marcus paused in his chopping, considering the question. I suppose I thought I could heal more people by changing the systems that create problems in the first place. Technology seemed like a way to solve problems at scale, to make a difference for millions instead of dozens. Elena was quiet for a moment, stirring a sauce that filled the kitchen with the warm scents of garlic and herbs. And did you make a difference for millions? The question was gently asked, but devastatingly direct. Marcus had spent years measuring his success in revenue and market share, in valuations and growth metrics. But faced with Elena's simple question, he struggled to identify the human impact of his work. I created jobs, he said finally. Efficient systems, better infrastructure for other companies to build on. But did you heal anyone? The words hung in the air between them, not accusatory, but genuinely curious. Elena moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, creating something warm and nourishing from simple ingredients. Watching her work, Marcus began to understand a different kind of value creation, the simple act of caring for another person, of creating comfort and sustenance from attention and effort. They ate at the small table near the kitchen window, the city sparkling below them like a circuit board made of light. The meal Elena had prepared was simple but perfect. Pasta with a sauce made from tomatoes, garlic, and herbs, fresh bread warmed in the oven, salad dressed with olive oil and lemon. It was the best meal Marcus had eaten in months, not because of the ingredients, but because of the care that had gone into its preparation. Tell me about before, Marcus said as they shared a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion that had never materialized. What did you do before? Before I became homeless? Elena's voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her circumstances. I was a social worker, specialized in family services, helping kids in foster care navigate the system. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the woman across from him. What happened? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. Budget cuts. The nonprofit I worked for lost its funding, and I'd put everything I had into the work. When I couldn't find another job in social services, I took temp work, but it wasn't enough to cover rent and student loans. One missed payment became 2, then 3. Eventually, I had to choose between keeping my apartment and eating regularly. The simple recitation of facts hit Marcus harder than any emotional appeal could have. Elena had dedicated her life to helping others, and the system she'd served had failed her when she needed it most. How long have you been on the streets? 4 months. Long enough to learn which shelters are safe, which food kitchens serve decent meals, where the police will leave you alone if you're not causing trouble. Elena met his eyes directly, long enough to realize that most people see homelessness as a moral failing, rather than a series of circumstances that could happen to anyone. Marcus thought about his own assumptions, the way he'd walked past homeless individuals for years, without really seeing them as people with histories and dreams and talents. Elena's story forced him to confront the comfortable distance he'd maintained from suffering that didn't directly affect his world. Is that why you were suspicious when I approached you? Because other people had made promises they didn't keep? Elena nodded, taking a sip of wine before continuing. There's something about being homeless that makes people think you're desperate enough to accept anything. Men who offer help with strings attached, social workers who treat you like a case file instead of a person, activists who want to use your story for their cause without caring about what happens to you afterward. The weight of trust Elena was extending to him settled on Marcus's shoulders like a mantle. She had every reason to be cynical, every justification for protecting herself from further disappointment. Yet she'd agreed to this strange arrangement, had spent the evening sharing her story and creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. What would you do? Marcus asked. If you could wave a magic wand and change the system that failed you? Elena's eyes lit up with passion, the first time Marcus had seen her animated by something other than wariness or careful humor. I'd create support systems that actually support people, not just emergency services that patch problems temporarily, but programs that address root causes. job training that leads to living wages, mental health services that don't have 6-month waiting lists, housing assistance that doesn't require people to jump through impossible hoops. As Elena talked, Marcus found himself seeing her not as the woman he'd married on a bet, but as someone with vision and experience in areas where his technical solutions had always fallen short. Her insights were sharp and practical, born from lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "You could do those things," Marcus said when she paused. "With the right funding and support, you could build the programs you're describing." Elena's laugh held a note of sadness. "It takes more than good intentions to change systems, Marcus. It takes political will, sustained funding, and people in power who actually care about solving problems rather than managing them." They talked late into the evening, their conversation ranging from policy to philosophy, from personal dreams to practical solutions. Marcus found himself sharing ambitions he'd never voiced to anyone, his desire to use technology for social good, his growing sense that success without meaning was just elaborate emptiness. When they finally said goodnight, Marcus lying alone in his king-sized bed while Elena settled into the guest room down the hall, he stared at the ceiling and tried to process the day's events. In less than 24 hours, he'd married a stranger, shared more honest conversation than he'd had in months, and begun to question assumptions he'd held about success, purpose, and human connection. The second day brought new challenges and revelations. Marcus had planned to work from home, conducting his usual round of meetings and strategic calls, while Elena acclimated to her new surroundings. But when he emerged from his home office for lunch, he found her on the balcony, sketching in a notebook with focused intensity. "What are you working on?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. Elena looked up, her face flushed with creative energy. "Program designs. Our conversation last night got me thinking about what comprehensive support systems might actually look like. I'm trying to map out the interconnections, the way different services could reinforce each other instead of working in isolation." Marcus leaned closer to look at her sketches, surprised by their sophistication. Elena had created flowcharts and organizational diagrams that would have impressed his best systems analysts. Her approach was intuitive but methodical, identifying points of failure in existing systems and designing elegant solutions. "This is remarkable," Marcus said, studying a diagram that showed how job training, mental health services, and housing assistance could be coordinated to maximize effectiveness. "Have you shown these to anyone?" Elena shook her head. "Who would listen? I'm a homeless woman with a social work degree and no institutional credibility. These are just ideas, dreams on paper." Marcus felt something crystallize in his mind, a connection between Elena's vision and his own resources that seemed almost inevitable. What if they didn't have to stay on paper? What if you had the funding and platform to make them real? The look Elena gave him was part hope, part skepticism. "Don't offer things you can't deliver, Marcus. I've learned to protect myself from disappointment." "I'm not offering anything," Marcus said carefully. "I'm asking if you'd be interested in a partnership. Your expertise and vision, my resources and connections. Not charity, not pity. A business partnership between equals." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers stilling on the notebook pages. "What's your stake in this? What do you get out of helping someone redesign social services?" The question forced Marcus to examine his own motives, to dig beneath the surface explanations, and find the truth that drove his growing investment in Elena's ideas. "Purpose," he said finally. "For years, I've been building technology that makes other people rich but doesn't address the problems that matter most. You're talking about using resources to actually improve lives, to create systems that value human dignity over profit margins. And you think you can just write a check and fix homelessness?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I think you can design solutions that work, and I can provide the resources to implement them, but only if you're willing to take the lead, to be the vision behind whatever we create." Elena studied his face, searching for signs of condescension or hidden agendas. "This isn't about your bet with Derek, is it? This isn't part of proving you can make a marriage work for 7 days?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized how his offer might sound. No, this is about recognizing that I've been looking for meaning in all the wrong places, and you've just shown me what meaningful work actually looks like. They spent the afternoon on the balcony, Elena explaining her ideas in detail, while Marcus asked questions that sharpened her thinking and identified potential implementation strategies. As the hours passed, their conversation evolved from tentative exploration to genuine collaboration, two minds working together to solve problems that had seemed intractable when faced alone. "There's something else," Elena said, as the sun began to set over the Sound. "If we're going to work together, you need to understand what it's actually like for the people we'd be serving. Tomorrow, I want to show you my world, not from the window of a corporate boardroom, but from street level." Marcus felt a flutter of anxiety at the suggestion. His knowledge of homelessness was theoretical, filtered through reports and statistics rather than direct experience. The thought of stepping into Elena's world, of seeing the reality behind the numbers, was both compelling and terrifying. "Okay," he said, the word carrying more weight than simple agreement. "Show me." The third day dawned cold and gray, with a kind of persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into everything. Marcus dressed in his oldest jeans and a worn jacket, feeling awkward and overdressed even in clothes that would have been casual in his usual circles. Elena met him at the door, her expression serious but not unkind. "Some rules," she said as they walked toward the downtown area. "Don't give money to anyone unless I tell you it's okay. Don't take pictures. Don't stare. And don't try to solve anyone's problems with quick fixes or business advice." They started at the shelter where Elena had spent many nights, a converted warehouse that served breakfast to anyone who needed it. The building was clean but worn, filled with the quiet dignity of people making the best of difficult circumstances. Marcus watched Elena move through the space, greeting staff and clients with genuine warmth. Her relationships here clearly built on mutual respect rather than service provider dynamics. "Elena's been helping us with some organizational stuff," explained Maria, the shelter coordinator, when Elena introduced Marcus as her husband. "She's got a gift for seeing how to make things work better without making them more complicated." As they shared breakfast with other shelter guests, Marcus found himself listening to stories that challenged every assumption he'd held about homelessness. There was Robert, a veteran dealing with PTSD, whose disability benefits weren't enough to cover both medication and rent. Sarah, a single mother whose job at a fast food restaurant paid so little that she couldn't afford both childcare and housing. Jim, a former construction worker whose arthritis had ended his career, but who was too young for Social Security and too old for most employers to consider hiring. "Each story is different," Elena explained as they walked to their next stop, "but they all have common elements: gaps in support systems, economic structures that don't provide living wages, healthcare costs that can bankrupt families, housing markets that price out working people." Their next stop was the day center, a place where homeless individuals could shower, do laundry, and access social services. Marcus watched Elena interact with staff and clients, noticing how she balanced professional knowledge with personal experience, how she could navigate between worlds that rarely intersected. "The thing most people don't understand," Elena said as they sat in a small park where several homeless individuals had set up temporary camps, "is how much energy it takes just to survive. When you don't have a permanent address, everything becomes complicated. Getting a job, accessing health care, even voting, requires documentation and stability that homelessness makes nearly impossible." Marcus looked around the park, seeing sleeping bags tucked discreetly behind bushes, shopping carts filled with possessions, people who'd created small communities in spaces society preferred to ignore. What would make the biggest difference? If you could change one thing, Elena considered the question carefully. Housing-first policies that don't require people to jump through hoops or prove they're worthy of shelter. Most other problems become manageable once people have a stable place to live. But housing costs in cities like Seattle make that incredibly difficult, even for people with full-time jobs. As they continued their tour, visiting food kitchens and service centers, Marcus began to understand the complexity of problems that his technical solutions had always oversimplified. These weren't issues that could be solved with apps or algorithms, but systemic challenges that required sustained effort, political will, and recognition of human dignity in policy design. "I had a job," Elena said as they sat in a coffee shop near Pioneer Square, the place where their strange journey had begun 3 days earlier. "A career, actually. I helped families navigate systems that were supposed to protect children, but often just moved problems around without solving them. When I became homeless, I found myself on the other side of those systems, experiencing firsthand how dehumanizing they can be." Marcus thought about his own career, the way he'd built systems that optimized efficiency without considering human impact. How do you maintain hope in the face of all this? How do you not become overwhelmed by problems that seem too big to solve? Elena's smile was sad but genuine. "Because I've seen what's possible when systems work the way they're supposed to. I've helped families reunite, seen kids find stability, watched communities come together to support their most vulnerable members. The problems are big, but so is the human capacity for compassion and creativity." That evening, they returned to Marcus's penthouse, both quiet with the weight of the day's experiences. Marcus felt changed by what he'd seen. His understanding of privilege and responsibility fundamentally shifted. The comfortable distance he'd maintained from social problems felt suddenly unbearable, a luxury he could no longer afford to indulge. "Thank you," he said as they stood in his living room, the city lights below them taking on new meaning. "After their day among the forgotten, for showing me what I've been missing." Elena nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "The question is what you do with what you've learned. A lot of people take tours of homelessness, feel moved for a day or two, then go back to their regular lives without changing anything." Marcus felt the challenge in her words, the test of whether his commitment would extend beyond the artificial timeline of their arrangement. "What if I told you I don't want to go back? What if I said I want to use everything I have to build the systems you've been dreaming about?" I'd say that's easy to promise and hard to do. Social change doesn't happen on the same timeline as product launches. It requires patience, persistence, and the willingness to work with people who don't share your background or priorities. Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the city that had taken on new dimensions of meaning. Somewhere below, people were spending another night without shelter, navigating systems that often created more barriers than opportunities. The weight of his resources, previously a source of pride, now felt like responsibility he'd been too comfortable to acknowledge. "There's something we need to discuss," Elena said, moving to stand beside him at the window. "If we're going to work together on this foundation, we need to address the power dynamics involved." Marcus looked up from his notes, recognizing the serious tone that indicated Elena was about to challenge his assumptions. "How do we ensure equality when our starting points are so different?" Elena considered the question carefully, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. "Shared decision-making authority, equal ownership of any intellectual property we develop together, and recognition that community expertise is as valuable as academic credentials or business experience." As Elena outlined her vision for their partnership, Marcus felt both challenged and inspired by her insistence on structural equality rather than charitable inclusion. Her approach demanded that he examine his own assumptions about expertise, leadership, and the sources of knowledge that mattered in social change work. "There's something else," Elena continued, her voice softer now. "If we're going to be business partners, we need to separate that relationship from whatever personal connection we're developing. Mixing romance and professional collaboration can create complications that hurt both relationships." The practical wisdom of her suggestion was obvious, but Marcus felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of compartmentalizing their connection. "Are you saying we should choose between working together and being together?" "I'm saying we should be clear about which relationship we're prioritizing and how we'll handle conflicts between personal and professional interests." Marcus thought about the question, weighing his desire to continue their personal connection against the importance of the work they could accomplish together. "What if I said the work matters more to me than the personal relationship? That I'd rather be your partner in creating change than risk losing that opportunity by pursuing romance?" Elena's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of surprise, disappointment, and what might have been relief. I'd say that's probably the wise choice, even if it's not the romantic answer either of us might have hoped for. The conversation left both of them quieter than usual as they returned to Marcus's apartment that evening. The artificial timeline of their marriage arrangement suddenly felt more significant, marking not just the end of Derek's challenge, but a transition point in their relationship that would determine whether they remained connected or returned to their separate lives. The sixth day brought Derek Walsh to Marcus's office, his presence as abrasive as ever, but his interest clearly piqued by Marcus's absence from their usual competitive dynamics. Marcus had spent the morning in meetings with his legal team, exploring the feasibility of establishing a foundation focused on systemic approaches to homelessness and poverty. "You're looking different," Derek observed, settling into his familiar chair across from Marcus's desk. "More relaxed, maybe. How's married life treating you?" Marcus studied his old friend, seeing for the first time how Derek's competitiveness masked a fundamental emptiness, a need to win that had replaced any interest in what victory might actually mean. "It's been educational." Educational. Derek's laugh held its usual sharp edge. "That's not exactly the romantic language I'd expect from a newlywed. Having second thoughts about our little wager?" "Actually, I've been having thoughts about a lot of things. When's the last time you asked yourself why you want the Patterson contract? Not what it's worth or how it positions you competitively, but why it matters to you personally." Derek's expression shifted, confusion replacing his typical smugness. "What kind of question is that?" "It's business, Marcus. It's about winning, about proving which of us built the better company. But what's the point of winning if it doesn't lead anywhere meaningful? What's the point of building companies that generate wealth without creating value for the people who need it most?" Derek leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with narrowed eyes. "She's really gotten to you, hasn't she? Your homeless wife has turned you into some kind of social justice warrior." The dismissive tone in Derek's voice sparked something protective in Marcus, a recognition that Derek's cynicism represented everything he was trying to move away from. "Elena has shown me what I've been missing, yes. She's shown me what it looks like to dedicate your life to work that actually matters." "And what about our bet? Are you backing out?" Marcus considered the question, thinking about the week that had transformed his understanding of marriage, partnership, and purpose. "The bet was based on the assumption that our marriage would be fake, that I'd be pretending to care about someone I'd chosen randomly. But Elena isn't random, and what's happening between us isn't fake." Derek's eyes narrowed. "You're actually falling for her, aren't you? The brilliant Marcus Chen, undone by a week with a woman who has nothing to offer except sob stories and social worker idealism." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, revealing the depth of Derek's cynicism and the poverty of his understanding of human value. "Elena has everything to offer. Vision, experience, dedication to something larger than herself. If you can't see that, it says more about your limitations than hers." "Fine," Derek said, standing abruptly. "Play house with your charity case for the rest of the week. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've confused novelty for love and social tourism for genuine connection." After Derek left, Marcus sat in his office, processing the conversation and his own reactions. The protective anger he'd felt at Derek's dismissive words surprised him with its intensity. When had Elena stopped being the subject of a bet and become someone whose dignity mattered to him personally? That evening, Marcus found Elena in his home office, working on her laptop with papers spread across his desk. She'd transformed the sterile space into something that looked like actual work was happening, with charts and diagrams covering the walls and reference books scattered across surfaces usually reserved for tech magazines and industry reports. "Sorry," Elena said, looking up as he entered. "I got carried away. I've been researching funding models for comprehensive support programs, and your office has better Wi-Fi than the guest room." Marcus moved to examine her work, impressed by the depth and sophistication of her research. Elena had identified successful programs in other cities, analyzed their funding sources and implementation strategies, and begun developing cost-benefit projections that would make sense to investors and policymakers. "This is incredible. Marcus said, studying a spreadsheet that showed how supportive housing programs actually saved taxpayers' money by reducing emergency room visits, police interventions, and cycling through temporary services. Have you been working on this all day? Elena nodded, her eyes bright with the energy of intellectual engagement. Once I started digging into the research, I couldn't stop. There are models that work, Marcus, proven approaches that other cities have used successfully. We just need to adapt them to Seattle's specific challenges and scale them appropriately. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Elena's combination of vision and practicality, her ability to dream big while remaining grounded in evidence and implementation details. What would you need to turn this research into an actual proposal? Time, mostly, and access to local data about service gaps and demographic needs. If we're serious about this, I'd want to spend time with service providers, city officials, and community organizations to understand what's been tried before and why previous efforts have fallen short. Marcus moved to sit across from her, the desk now a workspace rather than a barrier between them. I can arrange meetings with anyone you want to talk to. My foundation lawyer says we can have the legal structure in place within 2 weeks if we move quickly. Elena looked up from her laptop, studying his face with those perceptive eyes that had become familiar over their few days together. You're really serious about this, aren't you? This isn't just guilt or novelty or some kind of midlife crisis. The question forced Marcus to examine his motivations honestly. 3 months ago, I would have said yes to all of those things. But sitting here, watching you work, seeing how you've turned abstract problems into concrete solutions, this feels more real than anything I've done in years. Even if it means giving up the competitive edge that's driven your career, even if it means Derek wins the Patterson contract and claims victory in whatever game you two have been playing. Marcus thought about his conversation with Derek that afternoon, the way his old friend's cynicism had felt like poison in the air. Derek can have the Patterson contract. He can have all the contracts if it means I get to work on something that actually matters. Elena saved her work and closed the laptop, giving Marcus her full attention. There's something we need to talk about. Tomorrow is day 5 of our 7-day arrangement. We need to discuss what happens afterward. The reminder hit Marcus with unexpected force. He'd become so absorbed in their collaboration, in the pleasure of Elena's company and the excitement of meaningful work, that he'd almost forgotten the artificial constraints of their agreement. What do you want to happen? I want to know if what we're building together is stronger than the circumstances that brought us together. I want to know if you see me as a partner or a project. The vulnerability in Elena's voice made Marcus's chest tighten. Somewhere over the past few days, their arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the desperate stranger he'd approached with Derek's bet, but someone whose intelligence, compassion, and strength had become essential to his vision of the future. Elena, Marcus said, his voice carrying more emotion than he'd intended. What started as Derek's challenge to step outside my comfort zone has become the most important thing I've ever done. Not because of the work, though that matters enormously. Because of you. Elena's eyes searched his face, looking for signs of deception or temporary infatuation. Be careful, Marcus. It's easy to confuse intensity with intimacy, especially when circumstances throw people together artificially. Is that what you think this is? Circumstances and proximity? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the closed laptop. I think it's dangerous for both of us to mistake gratitude and shared purpose for something deeper. You've given me hope and resources I desperately needed. I've given you a sense of meaning that was missing from your life. That's valuable, but it might not be love. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken until now, but present in every shared meal, every late-night conversation, every moment of understanding that had passed between them. Marcus felt his heart racing as he considered Elena's caution and his own growing certainty. What would convince you it's more than circumstance? Marcus asked. What would make you believe that what I feel for you isn't just gratitude or novelty or the thrill of doing something different? Elena met his eyes directly, her voice soft but steady. Time. Real time. Not the artificial pressure of a 7-day deadline. The chance to see how we work together when the initial excitement wears off and we're dealing with mundane realities instead of grand gestures. Marcus nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution even as he felt certain of his own feelings. Then let's give ourselves time, real time, without bets or deadlines or pressure to prove anything to anyone else. And if Derek demands his answer about the wager, then I'll tell him the truth, that the bet was based on false assumptions about marriage and partnership, and that what's happened between us can't be measured by his criteria for success or failure. Elena's smile was tentative, but genuine. You realize that means you might forfeit the Patterson contract? That Derek might claim victory in whatever competition you two have been having? Marcus thought about the question seriously, weighing his old priorities against his emerging values. A few days ago, that contract seemed like the most important thing in my business life. Now it feels like a distraction from work that actually matters. If choosing you and this partnership means Derek wins some corporate game, I can live with that. The fifth day brought a new dynamic to their relationship, a sense of possibility that extended beyond their original 7-day agreement. Marcus had cleared his schedule to spend the day with Elena, visiting potential sites for their first pilot program and meeting with community leaders who could provide insight into local needs and existing resources. Their first stop was a community center in South Seattle, where they met with Carmen Rodriguez, a veteran social services coordinator who'd been working with homeless populations for over 15 years. Carmen's direct manner and encyclopedic knowledge of local resources reminded Marcus of Elena, the same combination of compassion and pragmatism that characterized effective advocates. The problem isn't lack of services, Carmen explained as she showed them around the center's facilities. It's lack of coordination between services and funding structures that reward programs for processing people rather than achieving outcomes. Elena nodded, taking notes on the organizational challenges Carmen described. What would it look like if you could design services from scratch, without being constrained by existing bureaucracies or funding restrictions? Carmen's eyes lit up with the question, and Marcus found himself listening to a conversation between two experts who understood both the theoretical frameworks and practical realities of social services. Their discussion covered everything from trauma-informed care to the economics of supportive housing, from the role of community-based organizations to the importance of involving service users in program design. You two should talk to Miguel Santos, Carmen suggested as their meeting concluded. He runs a day center downtown and has some innovative ideas about peer support programs. If you're serious about comprehensive approaches, his insights would be valuable. As they walked back to Marcus's car, Elena was quiet, processing what they'd learned. Carmen's right about the coordination problem, she said finally. Most programs are designed to serve institutional needs rather than client needs. People end up navigating multiple bureaucracies that don't talk to each other, repeating their stories over and over without getting comprehensive help. Marcus thought about the organizational challenges Elena described, seeing parallels to the technical problems he'd spent years solving in corporate environments. What if we designed services the way we design user interfaces, starting with the experience of the person seeking help and working backward to create systems that support that experience? Elena stopped walking, turning to look at him with surprise and growing excitement. That's exactly right. Instead of asking how we can make existing programs more efficient, we should ask what the ideal client experience would look like and then build systems to support that. They spent the afternoon visiting 3 more organizations, each conversation adding layers to their understanding of both challenges and opportunities in the local service landscape. Marcus found himself energized by the complexity of the problems they were exploring. The way social issues required the same kind of systematic thinking that had made him successful in technology, but applied to questions of human dignity and community well-being. There's something else we need to discuss, Elena said as they sat in a coffee shop near the waterfront, watching ferries navigate between the islands that dotted Puget Sound. If we're going to work together on this foundation, we need to address the power dynamics involved. Marcus looked up from his notes, recognizing the serious tone that indicated Elena was about to challenge his assumptions. How do we ensure equality when our starting points are so different? Elena considered the question carefully, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. Shared decision-making authority. equal ownership of any intellectual property we develop together, and recognition that community expertise is as valuable as academic credentials or business experience. As Elena outlined her vision for their partnership, Marcus felt both challenged and inspired by her insistence on structural equality rather than charitable inclusion. Her approach demanded that he examine his own assumptions about expertise, leadership, and the sources of knowledge that mattered in social change work. "There's something else," Elena continued, her voice softer now. "If we're going to be business partners, we need to separate that relationship from whatever personal connection we're developing. Mixing romance and professional collaboration can create complications that hurt both relationships." The practical wisdom of her suggestion was obvious, but Marcus felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of compartmentalizing their connection. "Are you saying we should choose between working together and being together?" "I'm saying we should be clear about which relationship we're prioritizing and how we'll handle conflicts between personal and professional interests." Marcus thought about the question, weighing his desire to continue their personal connection against the importance of the work they could accomplish together. "What if I said the work matters more to me than the personal relationship? That I'd rather be your partner in creating change than risk losing that opportunity by pursuing romance?" Elena's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of surprise, disappointment, and what might have been relief. "I'd say that's probably the wise choice, even if it's not the romantic answer either of us might have hoped for." The conversation left both of them quieter than usual as they returned to Marcus's apartment that evening. The artificial timeline of their marriage arrangement suddenly felt more significant, marking not just the end of Derek's challenge, but a transition point in their relationship that would determine whether they remain connected or return to their separate lives. The sixth day dawned with a clarity that seemed to mirror the emotional honesty Marcus and Elena had achieved the previous afternoon. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of people who learned each other's rhythms, preparing breakfast while reviewing their notes from the week's meetings and planning their approach to the Foundation's initial programs. "I've been thinking about organizational structure," Elena said, spreading diagrams across the dining table while Marcus poured coffee. "If we're serious about community-led solutions, we need to build decision-making processes that center the voices of people who've experienced the problems we're trying to solve." Marcus studied her sketches, impressed by the sophistication of her thinking about governance and accountability. Elena had designed a structure that balanced efficiency with inclusivity, creating multiple pathways for community input while maintaining the ability to make decisions and implement programs effectively. "This is brilliant," Marcus said, noting how her design addressed the common criticism that community-based organizations were either too bureaucratic to function effectively or too informal to achieve sustainable impact. "How long did it take you to develop these models?" Elena smiled, but her expression held a note of sadness. "Years. Most of my career has been spent working in organizations that claim to serve communities while making decisions without meaningful input from the people they're supposed to help. I've had a lot of time to think about how to do it better." The doorbell interrupted their discussion, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized Derek's voice on the intercom. He'd been dreading this moment, the inevitable confrontation about their bet and its resolution, but had hoped for more time to prepare Elena for Derek's particular brand of aggression. "We don't have to do this now," Marcus said, his hand hovering over the intercom button. "I can ask him to come back later, or meet him somewhere else." Elena straightened, her expression resolving into the composed dignity Marcus had learned to recognize as her preparation for challenging situations. "No, let him come up. If we're going to work together, I need to understand the world you're coming from, including the people who've shaped your perspective on success and competition." Derek's entrance into the apartment carried his usual confidence, but Marcus noticed how his presence changed the atmosphere, introducing a tension that hadn't existed during their morning planning session. Derek's eyes moved quickly around the space, taking in the paper scattered across surfaces and the obvious signs of collaborative work in progress. "So this is the famous Elena," Derek said, his tone carrying the casual dismissiveness that Marcus had once accepted as normal but now found offensive. "I have to admit, Marcus, she's not what I expected." Elena stood slowly, offering Derek a polite but cool handshake. "And what exactly were you expecting, Mr. Walsh?" Derek's smile was sharp and predatory. "Someone more obviously grateful, I suppose. Someone who'd be more impressed by Marcus's generosity in rescuing her from the streets." The comment hung in the air like a physical presence, and Marcus felt heat rise in his face at Derek's crude characterization of their relationship. But before he could respond, Elena's voice cut through the tension with quiet authority. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of our arrangement," Elena said, her tone remaining level despite Derek's obvious provocation. "Marcus and I have discovered that we work well together on projects that matter to both of us. Whatever bet you made with him was based on assumptions that turned out to be incorrect." Derek's laugh was harsh and knowing. "Projects that matter? How touching. And what exactly do you think Marcus will do when the novelty of playing social worker wears off? When his board of directors starts asking questions about his sudden interest in charity work?" Marcus felt something snap inside him, the accumulated irritation of years of Derek's cynicism finally reaching a breaking point. "That's enough, Derek. Elena isn't charity work, and our partnership isn't a phase I'm going through." "Partnership," Derek repeated the word mockingly. "Is that what we're calling it now? A partnership between a billionaire tech executive and a homeless woman with big dreams and no resources?" Elena's composure never wavered, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself ready for whatever attack Derek might launch next. "You're right that our resources are different," Elena said calmly, "but resources aren't the same as value, and money isn't the same as expertise. I bring knowledge of systems and communities that Marcus has never had access to. He brings resources and connections that can amplify work I've been doing for years." Derek's smile faltered slightly, and Marcus realized that Elena had managed something few people accomplished, making Derek uncertain of his ground in a verbal confrontation. "All right," Derek said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's talk about our bet, Marcus. 7 days married to someone from a completely different world. I'd say the experiment has been illuminating, wouldn't you?" Marcus looked at Elena, drawing strength from her composed presence, then turned back to his old friend. "You're right that it's been illuminating. I've learned that the competitive game we've been playing for years is fundamentally empty. I've learned that there are problems worth solving that don't generate profit margins or market share. And I've learned that partnership based on shared values is more satisfying than competition based on ego." "Touching," Derek said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But what about the terms of our agreement? The Patterson contract if you succeed, your Aurora project stake if you fail." Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the choice between his old priorities and the new direction his life had taken. "Consider this my official withdrawal from whatever game we've been playing, Derek. The Patterson contract is yours. I'm not interested in competing for business that doesn't align with my values anymore." Derek's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to genuine confusion. "You're giving up $50 million in revenue because you've fallen for a homeless woman and decided to play nonprofit?" "I'm choosing to build something that matters more than profit margins," Marcus said firmly. "And Elena isn't someone I've fallen for. She's someone I've learned from. Someone whose expertise and vision have shown me what meaningful work actually looks like." "Fine. Throw away everything you've built for someone who'll disappear the moment reality sets in. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've confused novelty for love and social tourism for genuine purpose." After Derek left, the apartment felt strangely quiet, as if his aggressive energy had sucked something essential from the air. Marcus and Elena sat in the living room, processing the confrontation and its implications for their future together. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally. "I should have prepared you better for Derek's particular brand of toxicity." Elena shook her head, her expression thoughtful rather than upset. "Actually, I'm glad I met him. It helps me understand the world you're choosing to leave behind and why that choice matters so much." Marcus looked at Elena, seeing her with fresh clarity after watching her handle Derek's attacks with such grace and authority. "You were remarkable. The way you refused to be diminished by his assumptions, the way you stood your ground without stooping to his level." "I've had practice dealing with people who think homelessness makes me less than human," Elena said simply, Derek's version of contempt is more polished than most, but the underlying assumptions are the same. They spent the rest of the day working on foundation plans, their collaboration taking on new urgency now that Marcus had officially severed his connection to the competitive dynamics that had driven his career. Elena's insights into program design were complemented by Marcus's understanding of organizational development and resource allocation, creating a synergy that felt both natural and powerful. As evening approached, they found themselves on the balcony again, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay while reviewing their week together and contemplating what came next. The artificial deadline of their 7-day arrangement suddenly felt less significant than the genuine partnership they'd built around shared values and complementary skills. "Tomorrow is day 7, Elena said, her voice carrying no particular emotion beyond simple observation. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of transition in the air between them. "Are you ready for this arrangement to end? Ready to return to your previous life?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from the water to the city lights beginning to flicker on as darkness fell. "I don't think either of us can return to our previous lives. Too much has changed, too much has been revealed about what we want our lives to mean." "What do you want to happen tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "What would feel right to you?" Elena turned to face him, her expression serious but hopeful. "I want to continue building something meaningful together. I want to see if our partnership can create the kind of change we've been planning, and I want to discover whether the connection we've developed can survive outside the artificial constraints of Derek's bet." Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that had been building throughout their week together. "I want all of those things too, but I also want something else." "What?" Marcus took Elena's hands in his, feeling the strength and warmth that had become so familiar over their few days together. "I want the chance to love you properly. Not because of a bet or an arrangement, but because you're the most remarkable person I've ever met, and spending my life with you seems like the best possible use of whatever time I have left." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Even if it means giving up the life you've built? Even if it means Derek was right about you throwing away everything for someone society considers disposable?" "Especially because of that," Marcus said firmly. "Because loving you isn't throwing anything away. It's finally finding something worth keeping." The 7th day dawned bright and clear, with a kind of Pacific Northwest sunshine that made everything seem possible. Marcus and Elena woke in the same bed for the first time, their relationship having evolved overnight from partnership to love without fanfare or dramatic declarations. They moved around each other in the kitchen with an intimacy that felt both new and ancient, as if they'd been preparing breakfast together for years. "No regrets?" Elena asked as they sat at the table where they'd shared so many conversations over the past week. Marcus considered the question seriously, thinking about everything he'd given up and everything he'd gained. Derek would claim victory in their corporate competition, but Marcus felt no sense of loss at that outcome. The work he and Elena were planning together promised more satisfaction than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. "No regrets," Marcus said, meaning it completely. "Only excitement about what we're building together." They spent the morning with lawyers, formalizing the foundation structure that would support their work and ensuring that Elena's role as co-director was properly documented and protected. Marcus had insisted on equal ownership of all intellectual property and equal decision-making authority, creating a partnership that reflected their shared commitment to community-led solutions. The afternoon brought their first official board meeting, with Carmen Rodriguez and Miguel Santos joining them to review program proposals and discuss implementation timelines. Marcus watched Elena facilitate the discussion with the same combination of vision and pragmatism that had impressed him from their first conversation, her ability to balance idealism with practical constraints making her a natural leader. "We're not trying to replace existing services," Elena explained as they reviewed their pilot program design. "We're trying to create coordination and support systems that help people navigate available resources more effectively while addressing gaps that current programs don't fill." As the meeting concluded and their new board members left, Marcus and Elena found themselves alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of work that would occupy years of their lives together. The foundation was real now, with legal structure and funding and community support that extended far beyond their personal relationship. So what happens now? Elena asked, echoing the question that had shaped their week together. Marcus looked around the office that had been transformed from corporate sterility into a workspace focused on human dignity and social change. Now we do the work. We build the programs we've been planning, we learn from our mistakes, and we keep trying to create systems that actually serve the people who need them most. And us? What happens to us? Marcus moved to where Elena stood by the window, taking her hands and feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength that had carried her through circumstances that would have broken many people. Now we figure out how to build a life together that honors both the work we're doing and the love we've discovered. Elena's smile was radiant, transforming her face the way sunshine transforms water, creating something beautiful from elements that had seemed ordinary when separated. I think I'd like that very much. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same Pioneer Square location where their improbable journey had begun, but now the space looked completely different. The vacant lot had been transformed into a community resource center, with Elena's organizational vision made manifest in programs that provided comprehensive support rather than fragmented services. The first families move into permanent housing next week, Elena told the assembled crowd of community members, city officials, and foundation supporters. But more importantly, they're moving into a support system that will help them maintain stability and build toward their own definitions of success. Marcus watched his wife. They'd remarried in a ceremony surrounded by friends from both their worlds, address the crowd with the authority of someone whose expertise had been earned through both lived experience and professional dedication. The program they'd built together was already being studied by other cities as a model for comprehensive approaches to homelessness and poverty. Derek Walsh stood at the back of the crowd, his presence a reminder of the competitive world Marcus had chosen to leave behind. After the ceremony, Derek approached with something that might have been respect in his expression. "I have to admit," Derek said, "I didn't think this would last past the first month. I certainly didn't expect you to build something this substantial." Marcus nodded, feeling no need to defend choices that had proven themselves through results rather than rhetoric. Elena was right about the difference between success and significance. It took me too long to understand that, but I'm grateful for the education. Derek looked around the resource center, taking in the families receiving services, the community members volunteering their time, and the obvious evidence of systematic change happening at ground level. "Maybe I've been asking the wrong questions all these years." "Maybe we all have," Marcus replied, "but it's never too late to start asking better ones." As the crowd dispersed and the evening settled over Seattle, Marcus and Elena walked home together through streets that had taken on new meaning over their months of work together. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because they had learned to see it through different eyes. Eyes that recognized both problems and possibilities, both individual struggles and community strength. "Any regrets yet?" Elena asked, echoing their conversation from that first morning as a married couple. Marcus considered the question, thinking about the life he'd built with Elena and the work they were doing together. The foundation had exceeded their initial goals, creating ripple effects throughout the local social services landscape and inspiring similar approaches in other cities. More importantly, he'd found in Elena not just a partner in love, but a teacher who'd shown him what it meant to live with purpose. "Only one," Marcus said, taking Elena's hand as they walked through the neighborhood that had become truly home to both of them. "What's that?" Marcus smiled, thinking about the week that had changed everything and the years of meaningful work that stretched ahead of them. "I regret that it took Derek's challenge to bring us together. I wish I'd been smart enough to find you on my own." Elena's laugh was warm and free, carrying the joy of someone whose life had found its proper direction through the unexpected convergence of love and purpose. Sometimes the best things happen for the strangest reasons. What matters isn't how we found each other, but what we do with the time we have together. As they reached their home, no longer Marcus's penthouse, but a house in the neighborhood where their foundation was located. Surrounded by the community they served, Marcus reflected on the transformation that had begun with a cynical bet and evolved into the most meaningful chapter of his life. The tech mogul who had married a homeless woman as a bet had discovered something he'd never expected: that love and purpose were not luxuries to be purchased with success, but foundations upon which a truly successful life could be built. And Elena, who had agreed to a temporary arrangement out of desperation, had found not just security but a partnership that honored both her expertise and her dreams. 7 days had been enough to change everything, but a lifetime together would barely be enough to accomplish all the work they'd envisioned. As they settled into their evening routine, reviewing the day's progress and planning tomorrow's challenges, both Marcus and Elena knew they'd found something more valuable than any bet could have measured: a shared purpose that transformed individual ambition into collective impact, and a love that grew stronger through service to something larger than themselves. The bet that had seemed like Derek's cynical test of Marcus's authenticity had instead become the foundation for authentic transformation, not just of two lives, but of the systems and communities they'd committed to serving together. In choosing love over competition, partnership over domination, and service over self-interest, Marcus and Elena had discovered that the most shocking outcome of their unconventional beginning was not what happened in 7 days, but what became possible in all the days that followed.